broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to the weekly edition of WilmFront on this Thursday, the 22nd of April 2021. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the WilmFront YouTube and DLive channels, as well as the enhanced entropy software, which I've put in there, the live chats, where you can ask myself or my guest a question tonight or send through a super chat to support the show. So this time last year, the whole of Australia was under a coronavirus pandemic lockdown during the first wave. This was when the federal government introduced JobKeeper and JobSeeker to support businesses who were forced to close and workers who had no work at that time and could be permanently unemployed. Both these programs were extremely expensive and shattered the Morrison government's 2019 projected budget surplus. I think my guess there, that's their trading that you can hear. I'll just mute them for a moment. But yes, so 1 year later, we have both JobKeeper and JobSeeker ending. No state in Australia is under a lockdown or severe restrictions. So life here is as normal as it has been for a long time. The predictions of pending economic doom that were made, including on this program, have not come to fruition, with Australia now technically out of recession and unemployment now trending downwards. Now, why is this so? Well, my guest tonight is going to shed some light on why that's the case. Andrew Abrahamian is an experienced global financial markets analyst and commentator. He is the CEO of Australian House and Home, an Australian investment property supplier. He has appeared as a financial market expert on CNBC, and it's my pleasure to welcome him to WilmFront live from Chengdu in China. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Tim.
I should have reminded you during my introduction that the audience could still hear you, so they found they heard you. Is that trades you were doing in that sort of bubbly noise?
Yeah, my apologies for that.
I guess that's the life of a finance trader. It's even though the markets throughout the world, they trade during business days, but obviously there's all different time zones around the world. Some markets open.
Yeah, no, look, the cryptocurrency market's 24/7 actually, so it never sleeps at all. But yeah, keeps you on your toes, so to speak. Very interesting.
Definitely no bank holidays when it comes to crypto. Or wallet holidays.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The markets have been, really crazy the last 6 months. All markets in particular, but there's a lot of lessons that could have been learned from the 2008 financial crisis, and I think a lot of people have, misread a lot of the financial information that has been broadcast, especially throughout the US, and other OECD countries, and a lot of opportunities have passed by, good opportunities to say the least, that were as well.
Now, even though you're living and working in China at the moment, as your accent gives away, you're an Australian, you're born and raised here. A few people were asking the origins of your surname, Abraham, which is Armenian.
Correct. Yeah, I'm half Armenian, half Australian, but I'm Australian, obviously. So very happy to be as well.
Armenian Australians in prominent positions at the moment. Most obvious, Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier of New South Wales. There's also Federal Liberal MP Tim Wilson, and former Treasurer Joe Hockey is also Armenian as well.
Yeah, I think they've been in politics for some time as well, correct?
Yes, even though it's it's a small central Eurasian country, a former Soviet socialist republic, it still maintained its unique culture, and it's desperate is all over the world.
Yeah, there's actually more Armenians outside of Armenia than inside. So
that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, especially in Australia and the US.
Now, as I said in my introduction, there's been a lot of predictions of doom, economic doom this past year, but we're in a situation in Australia where our GDP figures have recovered. We had in the September 20 quarter quarterly growth of 3.4%, then in the December quarter 3.1%. We've just had the job numbers out with unemployment trending downwards from 5.8 to 5.6. Of course, that covers everyone who's basically got, an hour of paid work, doesn't count underemployment, that sort of thing. But that's always been the case with the unemployment numbers. And I've interviewed John Adams and Martin North on this program, who have been predicting for quite a while the housing bubble would burst and the stock market would crash, but it hasn't happened, and I don't see it happening. There's obviously, we have easy money at the moment, but what's your reading of the economic situation at the moment?
Look, first and foremost, man, I don't want to bag people, and it's like, but I mean, a guy like John Adams, when you've got, his title of his YouTube channel saying the total destruction of Australia, I mean, it's a bit extreme, and I think that, especially when it comes to economics and finance, right? Opinions don't matter. What matters is data. And essentially, when something happens in the past with very similar economic circumstances and conditions, you can bet your bottom dollar there's a high probability the same thing will happen again. Now, look, in 2008, when the financial crisis hit, I lost a bit of money, and I don't, hide it, or I think it's everything's a learning curve, and I was of the same opinion that the financial crisis is here. We should sell everything, and the whole financial markets are going to deteriorate and crash. And then the Federal Reserve decided to step in and do something called quantitative easing. Now, that's not really standard monetary policy, or it's something that is normally left to emergency circumstances. However, that sort of gave us a very good window looking back into what would happen during coronavirus. And I've managed to profit off it quite well, because not because I'm intelligent or I'm hyper sensitive to extreme announcements, or I'm aware of what's going on, just because I know I see the same thing happening all over again. We're going to go into ever more increasing levels of debt, and they're going to have to pump the markets up, and that's what they've been doing. Now, I'm not saying that the end result is going to be fantastic. I don't believe it will. But to say that the markets are going to crash when in 2008 they didn't do that at all, then your opinion is far off what the data shows.
Now, I'm an adherent to the Austrian school of economics, which the Austrian cycle of the business theory, the reason why the economy surges then crashes is because of things such as QE, that which is, well, in layman's term, is reserve banks printing money, which leads to capital misappropriation. And when the bubble or the money stops printing, that's when the economy should rightfully crash, and then there's a reset, which the aim is capital is more appropriately distributed. But the most common form of QE bubbles is in housing. And despite the predictions of housing prices collapsing in Australia, that's another thing. House prices are surging. even in Melbourne, despite what we went through all throughout 2020, the only places which property is declining is where a lot of universities are near, and also the CBD as well. So say near Monash University in Clayton in Melbourne, obviously the CBD with a lot of people working from home, and up near Bundoora, a lot of those units have significantly declined in value for obvious reasons. But overall, especially in the other states and territories, property prices are up.
Yeah, look, I mean, let me put a simple question to all people that are listening. When interest rates get dropped to zero and the cost of borrowing money is cheap, what did we really expect to happen? I mean, it's when you make the cost of borrowing virtually zero, it's going to drive a massive explosion in asset prices, and it has. And what a lot of people like, I was watching a property commentator the other day on his Facebook channel, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, but the market's going to correct and the market's coming off." Well, and my comment to him was, "Okay, so you're going to fight the Reserve Bank of Australia, are you? So your predictions are better than are going to fight are more worthy than the Reserve Bank issuing quantitative easing to the tune of billions of dollars a month." And obviously I got no comment back, because you can't really argue with that point at all. And that's what's driving this housing explosion.
The thing I've never had to me about the Austrian Austrian theory of the business cycle is because as you said, the reason the economy is not crashing, the housing bubble bursting, is because the Reserve Bank just continues to print money. Why can't they just what's stopping them from just doing that in perpetuity? I mean, obviously, if a Reserve Bank suddenly goes from interest rates to near zero to close to 20%, like during the 1991 Paul Keating recession we had to have, can they just keep printing money indefinitely and not ever having a correction?
Well, if you care about the accounts of your government in terms of your national debt, then you really cannot just continue QE into perpetuity, because what people don't realize is that every dollar that's printed is actually debt which you and me owe with interest. So for governments, and the other thing as well, if governments want to destroy their dollar, then that's a very good way to do it. I mean, QE is generally used for emergency uses. Now, on the flip side, I think the way the Reserve Bank is acting, because just so your viewers know, the Reserve Bank of Australia has never embarked on QE before. This is the first time in modern history that they've embarked on quantitative easing, and the purpose was for propping the economy up during coronavirus. Now, in the United States, they embarked on it during the GFC in 2008, and they had QE1, QE2, QE3. Now, I would say in the United States, they've got QE infinity, because the amount of money that they're printing in the US is ridiculous. My outlook on the United States is not very good when it comes to a lot of the metrics that people use to measure the state of an economy. I think the US economy is cratering. But on the flip side, the Australian economy is doing really, really well. And a lot of it has to do with our main exports, which are commodities. And commodity prices always go up in times of crisis. So there's a lot of interconnected pieces to this puzzle. But just to get back to your original statement, I agree, you can't do QE to infinity without consequence. And I don't think the Reserve Bank is planning on doing that. And I don't think that they really are going to increase the amount that they're doing it by every month.
I know that Treasurer, the way that he describes QE is that the Reserve Bank is injecting liquidity into the market. That's his spin. He has all sorts of economic spin words, such as the Australian economy is very resilient. I'll give it to him. He's a good spin master. But you're absolutely right that Australia doesn't have a history of QE like the US seems to have been at constant QE since the global financial crisis. And we were talking about Tim Wilson before. He's one of the MPs who's actually raising the alarm about that we can't just have QE forever. It can be argued that, the coronavirus pandemic is an emergency. You would use QE. But as you said, the Australian economy is doing well to a lot of our surprise, especially since we lived in such a global dependent trade world, and we went from a fully integrated globalization partner pre March 2020 to then becoming Fortress Australia. We still are Fortress Australia, and this is why I think that there's not much appetite amongst the Australian populace to open up the international borders again, because, we've been Fortress Australia for a year, and life is as normal as it was pre-COVID.
Look, I mean, at some stage, I personally believe the opening up of Australia will probably coincide with a reduction in QE. I think that sort of is common sense. We need the stimulus for the economy to keep turning over until we can have things return to normal. And let's not be let me rephrase. The fact that Australia is closed in a lot of respects is hurting the economy. It's just that the government is embarked on this QE, which is propping things up. So, I do look forward to the time where Australia can reopen for business. And I honestly believe that Australia is going to do the best out of every other OECD country in its recovery.
Obviously, the most sign of the pandemic having a negative impact on Australia is our CBDs, because of office workers for a lot of 2020 working from home, and a lot of them wanting to stay working from home. And obviously the Melbourne CBD, that's where you'll see most of the for lease signs and vacancies. But I live out in suburban Melbourne, and obviously that's where most Melburnians actually live, even though they may work in the city and travel to the city for events. And I go to the various shopping strips and shopping centres where I live. You don't see any of those for lease signs, anything like that, or the pubs that were forced to close because of COVID. They're all back in business. It's like they were never forced to close. So where people actually live in Australia, they don't see a empty tumbleweed main streets like there is somewhat in the CBDs, particularly Melbourne.
Well, a guy I went to uni with, he's the head of commercial leasing for, what's the company called? Not Jones Lang LaSalle, Colliers. He's the head of commercial leasing for Colliers, and I rang him up at about June last year, and I said, "Look, what's going on?" He said it's stuffed. He said it's stuffed. He said, commercial property's under pressure. That's no guess, because companies had to vacate, staff couldn't come to work. A lot of multinational companies which have their operations based in CBDs around Australia, they had to totally restructure their businesses for the purposes of COVID. So it's no surprise that is the area that's feeling the pinch the most.
Just going on that term, restructure, because obviously there were businesses that went under during COVID, but there were quite a few that went under that were probably going to go under anyway. I noticed where I live, some of the shops that went empty, they were on their last legs anyway, and they're going to be leased by somebody else. But with a lot of people just going back to the working from home, like I don't see why there should be this big push to, if people can do the job just as well from home and that works for them, then surely they should be allowed to. But obviously, it's going to be a restructure and painful if our CBDs and the restaurants and other hospitalities, the coffee houses, they're not going to get the foot traffic anymore. And when there's a restructure, a redistribution in the economy, it's painful for a few.
Look, 100%. There's going to be winners and losers with every dynamic shift that occurs, whether it be from a virus or from other unfortunate circumstances. But I think Australia is pretty resilient. Our economy is doing quite well, and I think on the most part, like you did mention, well, if people stay out of the CBD, then a lot of these businesses might suffer, and that could be true to an extent. But I'll give you a perfect example. Like in China, when this virus hit, and even 1 year after, which is now when the worst sort of passed, people's spending habits are completely changed. And I think the same is in Australia. Like if you don't have an online presence now, you're losing a lot of customers. People are starting to understand the convenience of ordering something on your phone and letting it arrive at your doorstep. So I think that whilst what you say is true, there's going to be less foot traffic in the city. I think businesses are smart enough to understand that there are other ways that they're able to attract those customers.
Yes, that's another aspect. Bricks shops they won't disappear completely, but there'll be significantly less of them. And I would argue that if you didn't have a significant online presence before March 2020, you'd obviously had been making the wrong investments, because I think during all the 2010s, growing your e-commerce presence would be important. And we are seeing in Australia the delivery services becoming more efficient, including Australia Post. So parcels are arriving much quicker when you order them online. And obviously, if there's more of a volume of online orders, click and collect, then it's the cost per order for the delivery companies. If they've got lots, then they can employ more people. It's more efficient that way. The cost base becomes less. So yeah, you're right to mention that, because that's another, you'd say, restructure, redistribution, but it was coming anyway.
Agree. 100% agree. The world's innovating daily. It either takes a pandemic or it doesn't. Things are going to change, and I can understand. I don't like to use the word boomers because sort of people get offended by it. But a lot of people that were used to go down to the post office, go do their banking in branch or in house. Things have changed completely now, and for better or for worse, this is the direction that we're going.
Yes, I feel that a lot of the bank branches, when as you said, the boomers eventually die, they'll become even more. There'll be less bank branches. There'll be, I would say, particularly, they'll sell less newspapers. I feel that sort of news agents are only existing because there's still a significant portion of the population who buy the Dead Tree edition of the papers.
Dead Tree edition. Yeah. Look, I mean, if there's a lot of indicators out there that are suggesting that a lot of the slack that businesses have, I wouldn't say slack, sorry, let me rephrase. A lot of the traditional business that business got before the pandemic, a lot of these businesses have moved to different ways to market themselves, and they're now getting a lot of revenue from places like the internet, from different sources where pre-pandemic they wouldn't have even considered. So in terms of innovation, I mean, it's done a lot of things which I think, as you said, were coming anyway.
Another that is particularly complaining about their hurt during the pandemic, and because of the Fortress Australia policy as the university sector, just because they have become so reliant on the international student fees. And well, I'm not a big fan of the modern universities, so I'm not particularly sympathetic to them. But I'll get your opinion on whether that aspect of our economy is as important as the universities say it is, and the governments do as well, because they're keen to get international students back to Australia, but know that it's electorally unpopular when there's still a lot of Australians wanting to get back.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, this has, I think the universities are copping a lot of flack in regards to this. Whereas I think if you're going to dish out flack to people for reliance on international students, you should be looking directly at Liberal and Labor government policies, because they're the ones that have pushed the universities, 20 years ago to change their business model so they can become more profitable. Legislation allows them to do it. So essentially, I do agree that based upon this current business model, where the universities get a large chunk of their revenue from international students, I don't. Obviously, it's very important for them, but this is the way that the governments successive governments, as I said, either Liberal or Labor, have pushed the universities to go. So can we really blame the universities entirely?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Governments do set a lot of the regulation and fee structures for universities. Even though most of them in Australia are private institutions, there's still lots of various government regulations and decrees, which is, I think, why universities themselves have such bloated admins as well, which it contributes to a lot of the fees as well.
Sorry, I said legislation. I meant to say regulation, but you use the right word. But yeah, look, I mean, this business model is not only adopted in Australia. International students are now the golden children of all universities around the world.
Do you think it will be a good thing if, well, as a side effect of this pandemic, that the universities might be forced to be weaned off them?
I think unless taxpayers want to continually, subsidize universities even further, then which I'm a believer of. We shouldn't really, free enterprise should be allowed to run their business however they want to, with the least amount of government regulations. I don't believe in government getting involved in business. I think the government should stick to governing, and they should let businesses run business. But as I mentioned before, whether we like it or not, the business model of universities globally is to attract international students, and it's not only Australian universities. I have a friend of mine here in China. His son lives in the US. He got admitted to Stanford University. And he was being hunted by Harvard. He was being hunted by Stanford. Obviously, you need to, be smart enough to get in there, but obviously, you still have to pay a lot of money to actually be admitted to them. So, I mean, I think if we want to take our universities out of that global competitive arena, I don't think it's going to be good for domestic education at all.
I definitely think that the deregulation is a much easier sell for governments than it would be, say, 20 years ago, given, well, as I said, universities' reputations aren't what they used to be. There's a real focus on that doing a trade is not just a respectable career, but that's where the real money is now. You can earn six figures if you go through a apprenticeship as an electrician or a plumber, other types of which were essential services during COVID. So there definitely, I would say, there is and our politicians in Australia, they always go with public opinion. It could definitely be done.
Yeah, look, I mean, I, I can understand why people are angry because there's a lot of international students coming into universities, especially at a time during COVID when people shouldn't be traveling at all. But in saying that, I'll just go back to my previous point if I can. Unfortunately, you have to be part of a global market. We can't just shut ourselves off from the international market and say, oh, well, because we don't like too many international students coming in, we're not going to allow it to happen. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen? They're just going to go elsewhere. And then these other universities are going to get more revenue and they're going to be able to improve their services and their education facilities a lot better because they're getting the money where we're not.
Well, was made there. I don't think Australian people, at the moment, the Australian people would be like, well, just let them go to those foreign universities. We don't really care.
Well, they're not if they would like to see more of their tax dollars go to subsidized universities, then they're more entitled to they're entitled to think that way. There's for every position that we take, there's always an outcome, right? I just don't want my tax dollars subsidizing institutions that can be funded by the market.
I put Roy on the screen. Tim, you have a terrible echo when you start speaking. I think that's coming through on your end, the feedback there. Have you got headphones that you can put in?
Yeah, maybe. I know I got headphones. Yeah, let me just. Do you mind if you just give me a second?
Yep, sure.
Have to have a look.
Obviously, there's a risk in asking a guest to change their audio setup because then might make it worse there. So thanks for that feedback, Roy. Hopefully we can fix it. I notice also in the chat we have, well, formerly Bieber anti-bullying, Hadran anti-bullying, he is known as now, who likes Fortress Australia and yet doesn't care about the universities not getting as much money. Mark Barnes coaching is an account I haven't seen in the Unshackled or WilmFront YouTube chats before. I'm not sure if you're a friend or a colleague or follower of Andrew's, but it's good to see a new face there in the chat. And obviously, Margot is in the chat as well. She was the one who suggested Andrew as a guest and got us in contact for tonight's show. It's been quite a fascinating discussion, and we're getting into some of the more intricate details of our current economic situation. Margot says maybe your mic is too close to you. I don't think so. The microphone is somewhat away from me. I'll bring back in Andrew here.
Yeah,
hello.
I've got the wrong jack.
Okay. Well, it seems to have gone now, the echo, for some reason. I don't know if you fixed anything there, but yeah, there's no echo when I started speaking there.
Perfect.
I noticed that there's like there's a slight picture change. I don't know. So it's one of in these technical things. Sometimes some movement that you can't explain suddenly fixes something.
Yeah, look, if it's fixed something, then power to it, right?
Well, that's another good thing about the fact that a pandemic occurred when we had all this technology. That even though, as I keep saying, I'm in Fortress Australia. If you wanted to come back, you'd have to go through the hotel quarantine, but I can directly speak with you through the power of the internet and get your views and opinions.
Yeah, it's it's fantastic. Really, really. Thank God for the internet in 2021. 2020 as well, because I'm sure people would have been very, very bored during the pandemic when it was in its worst days without the internet. So we didn't. I mean, a lot of countries' internet collapsed. They couldn't get bandwidth. A lot of businesses were having trouble. So I think Australia's internet held up pretty well, didn't it?
That was another thing that I'm pleasantly surprised about, that because obviously the internet has been a political football in Australia for the past decade with the NBN, but yes, it surprisingly held up with everyone working from home and going on to Zoom meetings, but obviously it was assisted by, we have the ongoing 5G rollout as well, which is helping mobile connectivity as well. And the telecommunications companies, they're constantly making their own investments in new internet technology as well. The NBN didn't turn out to be the well, it still was an expensive disaster, but didn't destroy the internet as we feared in Australia.
Look, I think what a lot of people don't realise is whether you're signed up to the NBN or not, a lot of your data travels through the NBN, right? So I think I agree. Look, as I said to you before, I don't think government should get involved in private enterprise, full stop. But as a redundancy, I think it's done pretty well.
Now, going back to Fortress Australia again, I've probably said that. Somebody should do a counter how many times I've said I've said that tonight. But it's such an accurate description. Well, for the past 30 years, as globalization continued in Australia and there was more outsourcing, there were always these Australian-made campaigns by Australian, but everyone still bought the cheapest product. But it's gained much more traction, obviously, over the past year, with, well, a lot of markets cut off as well, particularly during the March 2020, when there was so much uncertainty. International shipping was significantly delayed. There was a lot of shortages, not just due to surges in demands, but because parts couldn't come from overseas. That uncertain period is over, but now we have this, you would say, I wouldn't say mercantile approach from nations when it comes to the vaccines, but basically protectionist approaches when it comes to the manufacture and distribution of the vaccines. I'm not going to get into the vaccine issue itself tonight, but just talking about the vaccine market, because we had 3 million vaccines that never came to Australia because the EU wanted to have those for themselves. And then obviously with a lot of Australians demanding the Pfizer vaccine, which is mRNA, over the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is made locally and it's had its issues. Australians have learnt that we can't manufacture mRNA vaccines here. We have to rely on the US and Europe, which have shown how unreliable relying on them is at the moment. And we had the Victorian government announce on Tuesday that they were going to invest 50 million in an RMNA vaccine facility. Now, I'm just using this as an example that this type of vaccine protectionism coming from Europe, that has, I would say, further increased the demands that Australia become more self-sufficient. Now, obviously, no nation can produce everything it needs locally, autarky that's called. But certainly, we've said goodbye to a lot of industries, mainly due to overregulation, that could have stayed. Do you think it's wise for Australia to re-establish its industries? I'm talking about through free market free market means, because a lot of companies now are wanting to make sure that they have a steady local supply as well.
Look, it's a very loaded question, because there's a lot of factors that play into that consideration. I guess if I'll address it in a few different parts. So
yeah, because I sort of just dumped it all on you.
It's just, but look, I understand your question, and I think the first thing that has to happen is it has to start with legislation and regulation. That's the first thing that needs to happen. Like, I think, as I mentioned to you before, the biggest two problems in Australia right now are that unions want to pay everyone $1 billion an hour, number one. And number two, we don't have cheap energy. So if you want to manufacture something, you've got two of the biggest hindrances out there. You've got to pay wages that are way too high compared to your competitors overseas. And then on top of that, you've got energy costs that are sky high.
But we could have.
Well, I don't see the political will of either party to actually do it now, especially now that, everyone's talking about climate change and green energy, and, which is pretty much a pipe dream at this point in time with the current technology that we have. We need baseload power. That's what we need. We need cheap baseload power. If we want to start manufacturing again in Australia, we need cheap baseload power. There's no ifs or buts about it. And until Australian voters make it an issue and push both sides of government to start this thing up again, it's not going to happen. It's just a pipe dream.
The reason why we have cheap energy, government just got out of the way.
Well, look, energy. Look. Let me tell you. Let me put something into perspective. Maybe my electricity bill in China is 3 times cheaper than it is in Australia for the same period of time. And we're getting Australian coal to power these, power generation stations. So that's just a comparison for yourself and your viewers. And for companies, it's even worse. We can't compete. We have to address the competition issue through government before any of this can happen.
And we also, even though climate change politics has interfered with the energy market, we also have, a lot of the energy companies engaging in this, woke capitalism, wanting to get away from baseload power themselves, such as AGL and the big banks not financing new coal projects. We did have, in terms of electoral factors, the mini, you'd call it mini revolts in the 2019 federal election, with the regional Queensland voting strongly against the Labor Party, which was hinting that they wanted to not approve the Adani coal mine and had their ambitious 50% renewable energy target.
Look, I'm not a fan of green energy whatsoever. And, for yourself and your viewers, I'd ask the question, who is the number one investor in green energy globally? What sector? I'll tell you, it's the oil and gas sector. So essentially, and it's because of the politics of it all, right? So look, I've been very bullish on oil for a very long time. I own shares in ExxonMobil. I bought it, 12 months ago during the pandemic when it was $30. It's now 60 something, or $56. I think it closed out yesterday. It's buying oil and gas now as a hedge, because you're basically profiting off the fossil fuels that are going to power the world for the next 20 years, and at the same time, a lot of their profits are being reinvested into green energy. But it's funny, the CEO of ExxonMobil, I think his name's Darren Woods, I think it is, he came out and he said, look, the reality is that whatever the government is subsidizing now, this is not going to be the green energy solution that we're going to be using in 20 years' time. And the reality is that, look, look, a lot of people are dirty at China, right, for so many reasons, right? And I don't want to get into it because I'm obviously here, but I say power to them, right? The Australian government's stupid enough to subsidise green energy, right, where all the solar panels are made in China. 60% of the world's solar panels are made in China, and the Australian government wants to subsidise solar panels which are coming from China. So even if an Australian company wanted to start manufacturing solar panels, they wouldn't even be able to compete with a company in China because labour cost and the energy cost input. So, I think the government's got a lot of answering to do when it comes to these ridiculous regulations and legislation and this international pressure that's coming from for green energy. And I made the point to some total lefty lunatic the other day. I said to them, you go out and protest on the street for green energy and save the planet like your favorite person, Greta. And I just want to ask you a question. I said, where do 40% of Australian government tax receipts come from? Oh, I don't know. It comes from the mining sector. So if they like their hospitals and they like their roads and they like, the public services that the government provide, well, you can't be going out protesting every week to totally change the balance of the Australian economy because it's going to end in complete financial ruin.
I don't need to explain to this audience the illogical political positions of the climate left protesters. I mean, they have countless contradictions. You just listed one of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just I think. Sorry, going back to your point. What was your question again? Sorry, I got sidetracked with the.
Australian self-sufficiency is.
Oh yes. Sorry. Look,
you've answered it quite significantly, saying that if we want our industries back, need cheap baseload power, which is not happening at the moment.
Yeah, and that's the main concern. I mean, if you think about it, right? Imagine you're a company wanting to invest in Australia in some form of manufacturing, and you're answerable to shareholders, right? So you're okay. We can set up manufacturing in Australia, but our energy input, our labour costs, the regulations, ridiculous. Of course, they're going to go set up in Indonesia or India. It doesn't make any financial or economic sense for them to do it in Australia. So it all comes back to regulation and the way that the government approaches energy policy and labour markets.
Another business chance for Australian companies is compulsory superannuation, which is currently at 9.5%. The Morrison government, they've decided that they're going to allow the rise to 10%, which is obviously companies can't take it directly out of take-home wages, but certainly can redistribute wages over time. Now, it's become a huge political football as well, superannuation, because there are those union-dominated industry super funds. So obviously, Labor loves the superannuation industry, but it's another over-regulated monstrosity that it's become. What's your view on the super market in Australia? Because it's a pretty unique one throughout the world.
Look, I think that the government definitely, if they want to make people contribute to super, it should be diversified a lot more. I think about a year and a half ago, I was talking to Ross Greenwood on 2GB, and I said to him, look, the sad thing is that over 50%, or I think over 70%, sorry, of all superannuation funds are heavily linked to equity markets. And I said to Ross, if the Australian stock market collapses or if it crashes, people are going to lose a lot of their life savings overnight. So, and in saying that, I think superannuation does have value in the sense that for myself, I'd rather manage superannuation myself. You know, I mean, I'm in the financial industry, so I understand that. But for your average person that wants to put away a certain amount of money for their retirement, I don't see a problem with it. I think it's more in the way it's regulated and then the way it's run. But in saying that, it's like anything. You get too big, and all of a sudden, you know, you've got forces at play that don't really do the best for people's money.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, tied where I've often thought that it'd probably be safer to just put it in a bank a bank term deposit. You'd probably get more money over time. But and also the fact that, well, it's basically delegated, well, compulsory delegated investing of your money. Because it goes to these super funds who make all the decisions, and what is it? Their boards get paid. What is it? 400,000, 400,000 each a year to invest your money.
Yeah, I mean, and look, to be honest, the returns aren't even that good. Let's be brutally honest here. The returns aren't that good. All the superannuation returns that people are getting are totally dependent on equity markets. And you know, with quantitative easing now, I mean, they're doing very well because all these markets around the world are being pumped up completely. I think in America they call it 401ks, right? It's very similar to our superannuation scheme here. But you know, with equity markets at all-time highs, it's happy days at the moment. And I think it is a political football, but I think at the moment it's sort of pushed to one side because things are going very well in equity markets. But once markets turn, I think you're going to see this issue really rear its head in Australia again, because people are going to have suffer 20, 30% losses. And, you know, that's a lot of their life savings that they're not going to be able to recover for at least 5 or 10 years.
Now, moving on, your favorite at the moment and favorite market, and that's the cryptocurrency market, because Bitcoin, which is the main cryptocurrency, has just surged, and I would argue that's because of all the QE that all most central banks around the world have been engaging in, and it's called by a lot of people digital gold, even though it is not tied to a physical product like gold is, and because it does not. There's only a limited number of bitcoins in the world. This is why it surges while more and more money is created.
100%. And, you know, right now, I think I mentioned this to you before we came on the other night or something. The reason I was actually against cryptocurrency up until even a year ago, I was against it. And it wasn't for the reason that people would think, though. The reason that I was against it is I was worried that the government could come in and regulate the whole industry. And if they did that, that would deal a significant blow to the market. However, ever since COVID, what's happened is with all this quantitative easing out there, the banks and the hedge funds, they need another sector to put all this cash into. Otherwise, you're going to see inflation go to crazy levels in all other sectors. I mean, inflation is already running hot in the stock market. It's running hot in the property market. And, you know, they needed to allocate a certain amount of cash to another sector to keep everything in equilibrium. And that's why cryptocurrency has gone mainstream. I mean, in the last 6 months, you've seen Visa take it on, MasterCard's taken it on, BMW has done a deal with VET, which is another cryptocurrency. So you've got all these global organizations now getting on board with cryptocurrency. Now, the more global entities that actually take it on board, the less chance the government have to regulate and shut it down. So that's why I think it's got to the point now where we're at critical mass in describing the fact that the government can't shut it down anymore. So that being said, I'm very, very bullish on cryptocurrency.
I know that there's more and more Bitcoin bears emerging who say that it's all going to collapse soon. And what is it? The founder of Bitcoin, his name escapes me. It's that Japanese name
Nakamoto.
Yeah, that his identity is going to be revealed, and it's going to show what a massive massive ride it all was. There's always these sorts of conspiracy theorists, doubtists on everything. But yeah, I agree with you that I just don't see. Yeah, the government has basically failed in its attempts. It's a good failure to regulate it because it has, well, its decentralized nature makes it impossible. And well, there's multiple different cryptocurrencies now, not just Bitcoin, and it has seemed to have, like, there hasn't been this massive, as people thought, cyber hacks of currencies, that sort of thing. It's remained completely secure.
Yeah, look, it's really fun. I remember having a conversation with a few commentators that were totally against Bitcoin. People were spruiking gold and silver as alternatives. One of these guys was actually John Adams, but anyway, that's a completely another story. But he was saying how you should buy gold and silver, and and I said to him, I said, well, okay, so I don't care about your opinion. I said, what I want to know is if I bought gold and silver in 2011 at the peak of the market, how much money would I have made today in 2021? This is 10 years down the track, right? The answer is you wouldn't have made any money. You would have lost money. You would have lost money. Now, I appreciate that gold and silver have intrinsic value. That's not what's being disputed. What I like about cryptocurrency is what you mentioned. It's the fact that there's a finite amount. They could find another a million ounces of gold in Africa tomorrow, and all of a sudden the supply would increase. And I think in a time where you've got, as you mentioned, you've got, the US government going, the Federal Reserve just going into lunatic mode when it comes to quantitative easing, people are looking for assets that have scarcity. And what a lot of people don't understand about Bitcoin is that it has digital scarcity. That was the equation that actually gave it value in the first instance. If you don't have scarcity, you don't have value, you know. And with this loose economic policy and monetary policy that governments are running at the moment, there is nothing in my mind that will stop Bitcoin hitting $1 million in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, it's obviously go down for time because there are always these sorts of volatile periods. But just give you a personal anecdote. When I wanted to purchase a Gab Pro membership, was it 2 years ago? They only accept crypto because they've been deplatformed by Visa, MasterCard. So I went up through the process of converting Australian dollars to Bitcoin and paying them that way. And I had a bit left over, and there was no way to convert it back to Australian dollars. And then I checked in recently because, well, I saw all the reports of Bitcoin surging to see what my balance was worth now. And I was like, I won't say the amount, but I was just like, whoa, it's gone up to that much. I could buy something nice with that. And that was just leftover from purchase.
And you know what? And the reason for it is, going to your point, Visa and MasterCard would now allow you to get an account on Gab Pro with their cryptocurrency option. So because it's become so mainstream now, honestly, Tim, there are so many hedge funds and banks that have gone heavily into cryptocurrency. Now, just to give you an example, Bitcoin is now valued at, I think, $1.1 trillion. That's the market cap of Bitcoin. That is more than the 4 largest US banks combined. More. Dogecoin, that meme coin, which Elon Musk is getting behind, which started as a joke, mind you, when that hit 37 cents, the market capitalization of Dogecoin was actually more than Ford Motor Company. and that was over $40 billion. So, you know, the amounts of money that are being plowed into this sector are just astronomical. And as I mentioned before, as long as governments continue this quantitative easing, especially the US, the Federal Reserve, they're going to continue to inflate these markets. Because if you have more debt, which is what quantitative easing essentially is, you need to offset that debt. How do you offset it? Inflate asset prices. And this is the central bank's game. That's what they're doing. Okay, we'll issue more debt. You're on the hook, but we're going to offset that by increasing asset prices. So the markets are going to the moon. And we haven't even started yet. They haven't even started yet.
Now, we've spoken mainly tonight about the Australian economic situation and potential future outlook forecasting, but there is the rest of the world in terms of its economic activity. They've had the European nations and North America much more prolonged snaps back into lockdown than Australian cities have experienced, bar Melbourne in 2020. Some of these governments have their own support schemes. The UK one's called the furlough, and that some don't have any type of business support schemes. And then we've got the massive COVID surge going on in India. Is the situation in those countries, economic situations, would you say they're similar to Australia, or does the mixture of lockdowns from the government and then the way they impose, regulate, that have an effect? I've muddled that question, but
yeah, that's all right. Look, I sort of got the gist of what you're saying. Look, my major concern is that is the United States economy. The US economy is not good by any metric. Manufacturing jobs are down. Inflation's going through the roof. They're issuing huge amounts of debt. Do you know, because of coronavirus, right? They've done more quantitative easing this time than QE 1, 2, and 3 combined. It's really funny, right? You've got this situation that a lot of people can't understand. It's that the economy's down here and the stock market's at record highs, right? And again, I think people are like, oh, you know, that's why a lot of people are like, oh, the market's going to collapse. Everything's going to go down. You know, you should sell, you know, get your money into cash. No, you know, and I think what a lot of people need to understand is look back at 2008. Same thing happened. The economy went to crap, and the market started to go on this massive bull run. And look, it's not a good thing, because eventually the chickens will come home to roost. And what I mean by that is that it's not sustainable. In stock markets now have reached this euphoric. There's just mass euphoria in the whole market, right? And it's basically new high every day, new high every day, new high every day. And it's totally dependent. No one cares about economic data anymore. All they care about is the Federal Reserve continuing to print those billions of dollars every day? That's all people care about. So I think I've gone a bit off topic with your question, but I think, you know, there is definitely going to be a problem down the line economically, but I think Australia's policies have been a lot more measured. Our response has been measured, and we haven't gone to this unlimited QE situation like that's happened in Europe and North America. So I think that, you know, obviously the world is globalized now. So what happens in the US and Europe will definitely affect Australia. But I think that we're going to weather the storm a lot better when things do turn quite bad. And I think that should give Australians a lot of confidence. We don't have the levels of debt that the US and Europe have. It's still manageable. And just to give your viewers some understanding of what matters in markets, because there's so much information out there, and, you know, people just, you know, there's just too much to digest. So the reason that I say the stock market and the housing market are going to continue to rise is because central banks are now controlling bond yields. They've initiated what's called yield curve control. So what that basically means is that the central banks around the world have said, we're going to keep interest rates at this level for a certain period of time, which are really low. So when you keep interest rates artificially low for a very long period of time, that promotes economic growth. It promotes spending because people can borrow money and invest it and make a lot more money. Now, the problem is it's like an elastic band. If you keep interest rates low for too long, and then eventually the government, the central banks say, no, we're not doing this anymore, which is going to happen. Then all of a sudden you've got the opposite effect where it snaps back. So the question we're asking is, how bad is the snapback going to be when it happens? If interest rates do go up and they go up quite quickly because they've done quantitative easing for too long, then I think we're going to see some problems. Because when you're not getting wage growth, but then you've got someone servicing their home loan, which is $800,000, and they're now paying double the amount of interest on it, they're going to have a big problem with that. And the same in the stock market. You've got in the stock market now, you've got more leveraged positions than ever before in history. People are borrowing money to play the stock market. So when interest rates rise, it is going to create some issue. But I do think Australia is much better insulated to handle this. But albeit being in a globalized economy, we will feel some of that negative pressure that definitely is going to occur at some stage.
Peter Schiff, an economist he's been predicting economic doom in the United States for many years. He realizes it himself. He's called a bear broken clock because he's right occasionally when the market goes down, but he says the real crash will happen when the US dollar is no longer the standard global currency for the United States. What you talked about the QE happening over in the US and the fact that their economy is not great. Is that a possibility that the US dollar could no longer become the global reserve currency and trigger a real crash of the US, as Peter Schiff calls it?
Okay, well, if the US military ceases to exist tomorrow, there's probably a good chance that will happen.
Okay.
Meaning, right, is that the US is the global reserve currency for a reason, right? If you want to buy oil, you got to pay in dollars. If you want to buy minerals, iron ore, gold, silver, copper, uranium, people only accept dollars vis-a-vis the US military, so it does remind me of a situation where you go back to the fall of the Roman Empire where, their finances got so bad that they couldn't even afford to pay their troops, and the troops started to leave and started fighting independently, and that was what sort of capitulated Rome in its early capitulation. But I think we're in a different time now. Nevertheless, look, if this quantitative easing continues at this ridiculous rate in the United States, look, the US dollar is definitely going to decline further. I mean, I've been long Australian dollars since it was about 60 something cents. I think it's around 76 today against the US dollar. If you have a look what happened in 2008 to 2011, that's when the Australian dollar went over the US dollar's value. It went to 110. I think the high was 110.87 in 2011. So I'm predicting that is going to happen again. Right now, the Federal Reserve's game is keep bond yields low, keep the US dollar suppressed, and keep issuing more debt. And it's great for an economic recovery, but the chickens come home to roost. And the problem I have with a lot of these doomsters, right, it's that if I stand outside your house, Tim, and I say there's going to be a car accident, wait an hour. You say, where's the car accident? Oh, Tim, I'm just going to come. Stand there for a week. Yeah, it's going to come. Yeah, another month, another year, 5 years. When it finally comes, the person that said that isn't correct. Even though they've said that it's going to happen, It's like you can't say, oh, there's it's going to be doom and gloom like Rubini, like Peter Schiff, like John Adams, like Martin North. They keep spruiking the same stuff over and over again, and when it finally happens, they're like, oh, I told you so. That's not really predicting anything in my mind. I believe that because of Keynesian economics, you have these booms and busts more so than an Austrian model. I accept that, and that is true. However, we are at a time right now where debt is what fuels OECD countries. Debt is the vehicle that allows economic growth. So we're sort of stuck in this vicious cycle where add more debt, get more growth, add more debt, get more growth. And you're right, the chickens will come home to roost eventually, and we're going to have another problem. Question is, how bad will it be? And flip a coin. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I've thoroughly enjoyed your analysis and expertise tonight, Andrew. It's been interesting to hear. They're not, I wouldn't say they're unique insights, but they're the way you explain it. It's certainly, well, it's such a simple explanation, but it's something that I haven't heard before because, well, as I said in my introduction, I've heard a lot of these sort of doom predictions before. So, but it's a lot more complicated. But there is our economic situation, but there is simple and logical explanations for why things are still stable. Is the word to use?
Mm. Yeah, look, I think just on a final note for your viewers, it's not a time to panic. There's a lot of people out there that will say, oh, everything's going to collapse, everything's going to collapse. Cycles happen all the time. We live in a world that is based on cycles. There are booms and busts, but don't let these people that have horrible track records advise you to make crazy decisions because they tell you that the world's going to collapse. We always progress, we always move forward, and I think that whilst uncertain, we're headed in the right direction, especially in Australia.
Well, hopefully you can make it back sometime soon. We don't know when Fortress Australia is going to moderately reopen, well, at least to Australians who are overseas. I'm not sure if you've if it's been on your mind to come back eventually.
Yeah, look, I definitely will come back at some stage, but if I come back now, the Australian government won't let me leave.
It's like Hotel Australia. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. But you could actually go from China to another country legally.
Yeah, I can travel, but I've got to do quarantine. So
No, do all countries? Because every country is different when it comes to like quarantining of arrivals, but no nation has the strict controls that Australia does.
look, I think yeah, Australia is really a standout in regard to those controls. But a lot of countries aren't admitting certain people at the moment. But look, hopefully things get better because I haven't travelled for a year and a half thereabouts since I came back from Europe on the 1st of February last year. So yeah, it's been almost a year and a half now. So I'm definitely looking forward to travel again. I got family in Australia and Hong Kong, and people around in the US as well. So I'd like to travel, but yeah, just at this time, it is what it is. We've just got to ride it out the best we can, and hope that things get better soon.
There has been the two-way Trans-Tasman bubble open with New Zealand this week. New Zealand doesn't ban its citizens from international travel. So an Australian could travel to New Zealand and then go overseas, but you'd be an Australian fugitive if you ever decided to come back. You'd have to please explain why you left Australia to go overseas, and if it's not satisfactory, or you'd get a fine or maybe even prison.
Well, the Australian government have already said that you may not be able to come back straight away because they've got quotas as to the amount of people that can come back every week.
They call they term them caps, but given that what is it? A lot of our premiers lock down a city if there's an outbreak from hotel quarantine. That's another thing. There's not much sympathy for these returning Australians either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate in the sense that I never really tried to come back home. I didn't have to, but there's a lot of Australians out there doing it quite tough at the moment. Especially throughout Europe and other countries where there's not as much flight connectivity. So I do feel for them. It's probably very, very tough. But at the same time, I mean, logistically, it's very hard to get all these people. I think there's 30,000 Australians outside the country. So I think logistically,
come back.
Sorry, you just broke up for a second. I couldn't.
They're just the ones who want to come back, I think, that have registered with the expression of interest to come back. There's probably way more.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really kept up with that data, but yeah, I could only imagine it'd be very hard for them.
Well, hopefully I can see you one day, but in the meantime, all the best. And yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed your expertise, and so has the audience.
Pleasure, my friends. And come back to Australia. We'll definitely catch up.
Take care.
You too. Thank you, Tim.
And that's the show for this evening. Now, before I go and update on the other Unshackled production, so Brawler on the Brain, hosted by myself and Jared Searby for the foreseeable future. That'll be a DLive exclusive show because we don't want to censor ourselves for YouTube in that format. So it's simulcast on both the WilmFront DLive channel and the Hard Knocks DLive channel. That's the Hard Knocks DLive channel, which is Jared's DLive channel. That's also where he broadcasts his weekly Hard Knocks show, 8:30 p.m. Victorian time on his DLive channel. The next Brawl in the Brain, it won't be on a Sunday. It'll be on a Monday evening at 8:30 p.m. Victorian time. Make sure you follow the respective DLive channels so you're alerted when we go live. And Trad Tasman Talk we had our final Tuesday show, myself and Dewey DeBoer just passed. So we're going to be going back to our old Friday time slot, 6 p.m. Melbourne time. That'll begin on April 30th. So 6 p.m. Melbourne time, and that'll become a fortnightly show. So we're just going to be doing it every second week, scaling back a bit. But we definitely want to continue with regular shows. Myself and Due, before the start of this show tonight, we tested out the live streaming capabilities on the Trad Tasman Talk Odyssey channel, and it was a success. So we'll be broadcasting Trad Tasman Talk on Odyssey as well. We're part of their live streaming beta program there, so that's exciting. I'll send the link to the Trad Tasman Talk Odyssey channel on my social media, Telegram and Gab, Minds, and MeWe. That's where I post all the links to Unshackled content and notifications when shows begin. There's already an Odyssey channel for Brawl in the Brain, and also Jared's got one for Hard Knocks. I will be uploading the WilmFront and Unshackled YouTube archives to Odyssey as well over the coming weeks and months as well, because as you know, the Unshackled YouTube channel is on its second strike, so it could disappear, and I still want that content to be available to others. So keep checking out the unshackled.net. That'll always be there as an archive for Unshackled Productions content and our written articles as well. So I'll see you Monday evening, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on D Live for Brawler and the Brain. That's a day after Anzac Day. We're taking that day off to commemorate we're able to commemorate it properly this year, have an in-person Anzac Day commemoration. So that's why there's no show on Anzac Day. Until then, take care, and WilmFront will be back Thursday, 8:30 p.m., same time on the WilmFront YouTube and D Live channel. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.